They said coming home would feel like peace. Instead, the house sounded like a verdict waiting to fall. June air pressed on 412 Kingston Drive, humid patient. Paint flaked from the shutters in curled strips. Gravel muttered under my boots. I pushed the door with my wrist and stepped into a hush that had weight. The hallway smelled of lemon polish and dust. Heat clung to the wallpaper and the clock ticked like a small, stubborn heart. In the guest bath, I washed my hands twice out of habit more than need. In a quiet way. As a child, silence ran this address like an officer. At dinner, knives paused for questions. Conversation died for insolence. Years later, quiet kept me alive in tense. Here, it still wore a badge. "Mom," I called softly. A door clicked toward the sitting room, an answer shaped like absence. I followed the thin hiss of an oxygen concentrator to the back. Colonel Henry Evans lay in a bed that made him look reduced, a tall story folded to a few sentences. His eyes were bright. Everything else had been filed away. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice steady. I checked the line, the water, the call button, the battery light. I rolled my sleeves and started the choreography lift turn smooth tuck. The sheet answered in whispers. He let me help him sit, then drink. His fingers trembled around the glass. I felt Margaret before I saw her, the stall of heels on tile, the inspection of objects that did not need arranging. She stopped in the doorway, surveyed me, the basin, the damp cuff, then looked away as if dignity required it. She did not say hello. "Victoria." My father-breathed voice husked by weeks of effort. "Not yet," I said. "Too busy with a merger." A trace of humor crossed his mouth. When the glass tipped, I caught the drop with a cloth. His hand found mine and held surprised by itself. We had spent years clenching words into orders. This touch said more than any of them. "I'm here," I told him. He swallowed, then gathered the strength a syllable requires. "Proud," he whispered. The word landed like a delayed detonation, gentle but rattling. I didn't trust my mouth. I adjusted the pillow instead, an excuse for breathing. He closed his eyes. The lines around them eased. The machine ticked in even beats. When his breathing settled, I slipped into the hall. Margaret waited at the far end, one hand on the banister, posture polished to a shine. "You should have called," she said. "Courteous, cutting." I did. Her gaze flicked past me into the room. "There are aides for this." "I know how," I said. "Your being here will start talk." It already has. We let the sentence sit between us like a tray no one wanted to carry. Her heels spelled judgment as she left. I went back to the chair by the window. The oak outside threw green light onto the quilt. I thought of mess tents and triage, of the way a body sounds when it discovers the future of its next breath. I listened for that sound in myself and heard only the house. "Proud," he had said, and the syllable sat on my tongue like a coin too heavy to spend. I smoothed the blanket and switched off the lamp. The hallway received me with its old discipline. Somewhere a door shut softly as if closing an argument. I thought that word might save me. I was wrong. In war, you fight for ground. At home, they fought for legacy, and I was already the intruder. The evening settled over Richmond with a heat that refused to loosen its grip. I moved through the house like an enlisted shadow carrying water adjusting machines, measuring out patience the way we used to ration morphine in tents. My father dozed beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. His chest rose and fell like a tide that had forgotten its schedule. I brushed the sweat from his forehead, whispered that he was safe, and for a brief moment almost believed it myself. Down the hall, Margaret kept herself busy in ways that required no sound. A drawer opening a vase adjusted the click of her shoes, finding their place on marble. I had learned to measure her distance by those echoes. Tonight, they led me toward the living room, where drapes hung thick enough to smother the summer and portraits of men in uniform stared like judges in oil. My father's photograph was among them, young, decorated, unyielding. The man asleep in the other room looked nothing like the hero who had once commanded brigades, but Margaret preferred the paint and polish to the reality of failing flesh. On the coffee table lay an envelope embossed with gilt edges, an invitation that shimmered in the lamplight. Margaret held it between manicured fingers, eyes sweeping the elegant script with the precision of someone checking a legal clause. "The Jefferson Gala," she said aloud, "not to me, but to the heir. They expect the family to attend. Your father's name still carries weight." She set it down with a finality that felt like disdain. "But not with you, Linda. You should stay unseen. Too much gossip already." The words struck softer than artillery but cut deeper. I stayed quiet because silence was the language she respected most. Still, the portraits seemed to lean forward, waiting for my rebuttal. I gave them none. Instead, I folded the edge of the quilt in my father's room, straightening what could not straighten itself. The phone rang. Margaret lifted it with the elegance of ceremony and pressed speaker before speaking. Victoria's voice spilled into the room, crisp, confident, honed by boardrooms and mergers. "I don't have time for weakness," she announced, skipping greeting altogether. "Family honor is leverage, Mother. Don't let her taint it." The her required no clarification. I froze in the doorway, one hand still on the doorframe, the other tightening unconsciously into a fist. Margaret said nothing, but the pause itself was agreement. I could hear her inhale slow, deliberate, a sound I knew from every childhood punishment. Victoria continued her words, sharp enough to slice across the Atlantic if she had wanted them to. "Investors respect tradition, not pity projects. You know how quickly sympathy turns sour in the market. We cannot afford for Linda to drag this family name through whispers and rumors." I looked at the portraits again, the stiff collars, the cold eyes. How many of them had believed the same? That honor was a commodity, not a conviction. My father had taught me silence as discipline, but my sister had learned to weaponize it for reputation. I listened as Margaret's fingers brushed the invitation again. She didn't say yes, but she didn't need to. Her silence was her signature. The realization came to me like a crack of distant gunfire. The inheritance was not just about a house with peeling shutters or a stretch of land overgrown with vines. It was a currency, a battlefield in a different uniform. Every look, every whisper, every invitation declined or accepted was a maneuver in a war I hadn't prepared for. Overseas, I had patched men back together with trembling hands. Here, in my own family home, I was being dissected without a scalpel in sight. Victoria's voice cut through again, colder, final. "When the time comes, we'll handle her." Silence had been my cage as a daughter. In the army, it became my armor. The flashback opens on bright tile and brittle quiet 2009 late afternoon. I came home with a duffel and a truth I couldn't carry farther. I had withdrawn from law school. Margaret polished a spotless glass. My father hid behind the paper like a fort of headlines, edges aligned to the table's grain. I spoke, and the room changed temperature. The paper lowered. His eyes measured distance and discipline in a single sweep. "Disgrace," he said, like announcing a demotion. The word landed first. The slap followed a quick, controlled correction, more about order than pain. It startled the air. Margaret didn't turn. The glass kept orbiting her hand. Outside, a truck shook the window. Dish soap smelled like lemons and apology. I steadied the chair and myself. "I'm enlisting," I said. "Not rebellion direction." He folded the paper, excused himself from a conversation he believed won. We lived in separate languages after that, his fluent in silence, mine taught by drills. Holidays arrived like blank envelopes. Years became a corridor no one walked. Now late June 2023, the guest room hums with an oxygen machine. The pillow smells of rain and sanitizer. I boil tubing and syringes, line them on a towel like instruments. The clock ticks with a metronome's stubborn optimism. In the next room, my father coughs. I count the spaces between the sounds, measuring a storm's distance. I wash IV bags plastic pliant under warm water. Muscle memory moves my hands, flush clamp replace. Intense, this choreography bargained for mornings. Here it bargains for one more hour. I carry a glass to his room, tilt the blinds against glare. He watches me. My uniform lies folded on a chair, edges squared like a promise. Margaret appears and recedes, adjusting what is already in order. Mail-stacked magazines, aligned protocol exhaled. I offer tea. Her chin lifts. The refusal lands without a syllable. I slide an arm behind his shoulders. The weight is less than memory, heavier than truth. He winces. I apologize to the wince and slow. He drinks, pauses, drinks again. When I lower the glass, he looks past me to the chair, to the name tape. For a breath, I see the officer reading futures off maps. You did good, he murmurs. 4 small words, frayed but intact. They fall like rain on a deserted porch, late, ordinary, merciful, nearly unbearable. My throat tightens. I busy my hands with the blanket edge. It's easier to breathe while tending tasks than while facing ache. He studies my face as if memorizing it. Then sleep lowers him the way night lowers a flag. I pull the door until the latch clicks a private verdict. In the hall, the light thins to a soft gold. Dust turns in slow constellations. I sit on the floor beside the bed frame and draw my knees up until the pressure in my chest loosens. I don't cry. Tears belong to theaters, and our house never granted that stage. I count chips in the baseboard and consider how rituals can crown a day or choke it. The slap still lives in the architecture, a hidden metronome beating under drywall. The approval is here too, a whisper loosed late. Love and shame braid like wire. Pull either strand and the whole length cuts your hands. The past watches from the doorway. The present sits beside me and refuses to move. The future waits down a corridor painted courtroom white. I hold my breath and let it go, then do it again, borrowing seconds from panic to spend on steadier work. My uniform waits where I left it. My father sleeps. The house listens. Outside, cicadas hummed under eave. I thought tending his wounds would heal mine. Instead, it deepened them. They told me a courtroom was a place of law. That day, it became a theater of humiliation. The benches creaked as people shifted to watch me walk forward. The marble floor echoed each step of my boots, sharper than gunfire in a hallway where no one expected it. My dress uniform was pressed, the blue dark as midnight ribbons aligned the metal, resting exactly 2 fingers above my heart. I had worn it into combat zones of memory, though this was the first time I wore it into a civilian trial. The air smelled faintly of varnish and perfume, mixed like oil and water, unstable. My name had just been called, and I rose because duty had taught me never to hesitate when summoned. The bailiff's voice carried like a script rehearsed too often. The judge watched me with tired eyes, his gavel idle in one hand. Reporters leaned in with pens, ready, their cameras catching glimmers of brass. I lifted my right hand to swear in. But before I could finish the gesture, before my oath reached its first breath, Margaret stood. The movement startled the room more than any outburst might have. She clutched her pearls like a weapon, her face pale yet burning with cold fire. "Take it off," she cried, her voice splintering against the chamber walls. "You don't deserve that." For a moment, every body froze, the court stenographer's fingers suspended above keys, the jury leaning closer as if drawn into the gravity of her anger. Silence pressed down, the same silence I had known at childhood dinners when disapproval was served in portions larger than food. Victoria remained seated, legs crossed with deliberate poise. She leaned forward just enough for the cameras to find her profile, her voice smooth and measured in contrast to Margaret's shrillness. "Fake veteran," she said with a smile so slight it was more a scar than an expression. "Pretending honor doesn't make it true." The words spread through the gallery like a stain. I felt eyes on me heavy with curiosity and judgment, as if they were all waiting for me to crack. My chest ached with the weight of silence. For a heartbeat, I considered answering, reminding them of the sandstorms, the blood, the convoys. But soldiers learn when silence saves more lives than noise. And so I moved. I reached up with steady hands. The Medal of Honor caught the light once before my fingers released it. I placed it on the table beside the microphone, not with anger, not with shame, but with the reverence it deserved even when the room denied it. My hand lingered for a second on the cool metal and then I let it go. A hush spread instantly. Papers stopped rustling, shoes froze mid-shift, even breath seemed to stall. The metal gleamed alone in the center, its ribbon folded neatly like a flag over a casket. Every gaze in the courtroom locked onto it. Not me, not Margaret, not even the judge, only that small, heavy emblem that spoke louder than words. I stood straighter, though the absence on my chest made the air sting against my uniform. Silence filled every corner. For once, it wasn't mine to hold. It belonged to them, all of them, forced to sit with what they had just witnessed. And as the cold spread through me, I realized the truth. My chest felt colder than Afghanistan. A lie edited frame by frame can bury the truth whole. Morning cut through the high windows in narrow bands. The projector hummed. Reporters leaned in pens, ready. I sat at counsel table, hands flat, the blank space on my chest, exact where the medal had rested yesterday. The judge called us to order. The gallery fell into a hush. Dust floated through the beam like silent ash, and the wood benches sighed as if they remembered older verdicts. Soon, Victoria rose. She didn't look at me. "Your Honor," she said, voice-tuned for cameras with the court's permission. The screen blinked my father's bedroom door, a strip of hall my shoulder in the jam. I knew the night. Margaret lifted a tissue. The audio sounded like confession in a can. Jump cut. I stood inside the doorway, jaw set, one hand on the knob. My voice, tired, contextless, on purpose, filled the room. "You never wanted a daughter." The sentence hung like bait. The image froze long enough for everyone to swallow it whole. The next seconds, the apology, the returning his hand, finding mine, were gone. A hard edit makes love disappear like a magic trick. Jury's shoulders tightened. Whispers traveled the aisles, selfish, ungrateful performance. Margaret dabbed like a trained mourner. Victoria watched the screen the way a surgeon watches a monitor as vitals drop. The clip ended with a clean cut to black. Truth excised with firm edges. The judge looked to our table. The room inhaled. Kellerman leaned close, voice dry and practical. "We can fight this." I remembered tents where men lived because I refused panic. Tables where silence punished. Patrols where silence saved. "No," I said. His eyes asked why. Mine answered, "Not yet." Across the aisle, Victoria arranged sympathetic concern. She touched Margaret's wrist, an image calibrated for the 6 o'clock news. I could feel the headline assemble itself. Ms. Evans, the judge said, meaning me, meaning the woman recast as defendant in a story she had lived. "Do you wish to respond to the video?" Every gaze turned. The white rectangle waited for a better story. My mouth knew facts. My body knew the cost. I could narrate nights of bleach, morphine, and regret. I could explain how forgiveness often chooses a whisper because a shout would break it. Instead, I let seconds gather like sand. I shook my head. "No, Your Honor." A serrated murmur. For some, refusal meant arrogance. For others, admission. A few recognized patience, the kind that trusts storms to tire. The judge nodded and turned back to Victoria, already ready. Beside my pad, Kellerman slid a manila envelope to my elbow, the clerk's stamp still damp. Neither of us looked. Paper travels under floors like water under ice, quiet, steady, decisive. There are ways to speak that never touch a microphone. Recess. Benches groaned. Shoes scraped. I stayed seated. People studied me and waited for a flinch. I wasn't composed. I was trained. Training tells the body what to do when the heart wants to bolt. When the room thinned, I stood. The uniform held me together. I traced the blank space on my chest with 2 fingers, not a wound, a reminder. The projector cooled with small clicks. A bailiff unplugged the cable as if folding a flag. Whitaker's name did not cross my mind. Fort Belvoir did a landmark no one here needed to know I could navigate. Kellerman gathered his folders with calendar-clean efficiency. We said nothing. Paper had already begun to speak in rooms without cameras. The bailiff announced we'd resume on the hour. People drifted back, coffee traded for folded hands. I set my palms on the table and let quiet settle where shouting wanted to be. The judge returned. The gavel lifted. The scene reset. They thought I was cornered. But silence can be the sharpest blade. In combat, silence was survival. In court, silence was strategy. The basement office smelled of paper and dust, the kind that clung to everything it touched. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, steady but tired, their glow washing the cinder-block walls in a pallid shade of yellow. I followed Kellerman down the narrow corridor, my boots echoing on concrete. Above us, the courtroom still held its drama, but here the noise dulled into weightless quiet. I had grown used to silence as armor. Today, it became something else, my weapon, not in sound, but in record. Kellerman didn't waste words. He set his worn briefcase on the desk, opened the brass latches with a practiced snap, and spread a sheaf of papers across the scarred surface. "These are subpoenas," he said, tapping the top one. His tone was flat, the cadence of someone who trusted ink more than rhetoric. Fort Belvoir Archives. The Maddox Residence's private security feed. Chain of custody filed under seal. They'll want to contest, but we're early enough to lock it down. The clerk behind the glass window adjusted her glasses and waited. Her rubber stamp already stood in a pool of red ink, patient as a weapon on safety. I watched the forms slide under her slot, each page like a loaded round chambered quietly. My throat felt dry, but not from fear. This was terrain I understood: checklists, evidence, procedure. It was no different from triage: secure the airway, stop the bleeding, preserve the vital signs until reinforcement arrives. The courtroom upstairs was noise. This room was life support. Kellerman handed me a carbon copy. "You'll keep this," he said. "Never leave it behind. You're holding proof that the truth exists in more than just memory." I nodded, fingers brushing the raised seal embossed at the top. The paper was thin, almost insubstantial, but the weight pressed into my palm as if it carried lead. I remembered firefights where the loudest man was the first to be cut down, where the ones who survived moved quietly, listening, cataloging. The rhythm was the same here. "We don't shout," I whispered under my breath. "We document." The clerk's stamp landed sharp and final. The sound cracked the silence like a rifle bolt sliding home. She slid the stack back through the slot eyes, expressionless, a civil servant watching another file join the bloodstream of bureaucracy. But to me, it was more than paper. It was breath. It was proof, waiting for its moment to rise. Kellerman closed his briefcase and locked the clasps again. "The opposition thinks they won today with that video," he said softly. "They don't know what's coming." He didn't smile, didn't wink. He wasn't that type of lawyer. But I caught the faint tightening of his jaw, the look of a man who respected war and knew when to conserve ammunition. I slipped the sealed subpoena copy into my jacket pocket. The edges pricked against my ribs as if reminding me it was alive, sharp, dangerous in its own way. Not a sword, but something sharper, proof on paper, signed and stamped. A record that couldn't be mocked away. For the first time since stepping into that courtroom, I felt the balance shift just slightly, but enough to breathe deeper. Upstairs, they painted me as an intruder. Down here, I built the counterweight, word by word, file by file. Truth doesn't shout. It waits, patient and absolute. And when it arrives, no performance can drown it. I walked out of the basement office into the stairwell, the copy pressing against my side. The noise from above trickled faintly through the vents, reporters asking questions, heels clicking on marble, voices tuned to spectacle. None of it mattered now. I had something stronger than applause, something quieter than shame. I had no voice in court that day, but my documents would speak louder than screams. They wanted me to burn under their story. All I did was sit in the smoke. Outside the courthouse, evening pressed against a forest of cameras. Boom mics grazed shoulders. Tripods clicked. Red lights winked awake. I kept to the edge, heat soaking stone through my boots. The air tasted of metal and flash powder. The steps held heat like coals. Margaret arrived as if she owned the horizon, pearls set to stun grief, tailored for broadcast. Asked about the disturbing footage, she paused the way headlines like, "She dishonors his name," she said, vowels cool as glass. Yes. Across the steps, Victoria worked the rope line with the ease of someone who had turned sincerity into a metric. Questions slid off the way rain refuses wax. She was never a daughter, only a fraud, clean, compact, stackable. I stood beneath a column and studied their choreography, Margaret's polished sorrow, Victoria's crisp outrage, reporters' hunger. The Jefferson Gala floated back, the gold script set down like a verdict. Appearances were our first language. Someone spotted me and lifted a phone, no malice, only the collector's urge to match a headline with a face. I stepped into shade and touched the lining of my pocket. Metal met my palm, a shape I knew without seeing weight, truer than anything on those stairs. I held it until my pulse remembered itself. By the time I reached the motel, the sky had faded to the flat color of old cameras. The door opened on the chill. Only cheap units make a cold that isn't winter, only absence. I boiled water in the coffee maker and sat on the bed with the remote, unsure whether I wanted noise or proof. The anchor chose both. My face transmitted in grain, then cut to Margaret. The lower third marched their story. A poll asked if I had exploited a dying man. I scrolled until comments blurred. Some praised Victoria's poise. Some diagnosed me from a single frame, selfish, dramatic, dangerous. A few, tucked like contraband, asked to see the full video. Their voices were small. In the mirror, my uniform looked too formal for a room like this, but I kept it on. Sometimes you need the seams to hold you in place. I poured and left the cup on the dresser, steam curling like a controlled burn. In the field, we let certain fires run, watch the wind protect the perimeter, wait. Stomp too early and your heel throws sparks. On screen, a panel assembled, a columnist, a veteran who didn't know me, a lawyer who did. The veteran chose a sentence no one could dispute. The columnist sharpened hers. Victoria's quote ran again in font large enough to count. I muted the sound and listened to the silence I trusted. It said, "Breathe, count, hold." My phone buzzed, a text from Kellerman. No words, only a photo of a time-stamped receipt and the corner of a sealed envelope, purple ink still wet. I stared until the shaking I hadn't admitted to settled. Upstairs, they had shown a cut. Downstairs, we had started the reel. The metal warmed under my palm. I didn't take it out. The room hummed mini fridge ice machine traffic. Laughter spiked in the hallway. Doors shut. The anchor moved to weather. Public opinion turned while I watched like a tide answering a moon I couldn't see. A map shaded itself against me, county by county. Percentages migrated. Headlines settled like ash. I could hate them for it, but hate is a heat I can't afford. I turned the TV off and let the dark level the room. I sat on the carpet and leaned against the bed frame the way I'd leaned against cots when young soldiers asked whether they'd done enough to go home. I didn't answer then. Answers break in transit. Tonight I held my breath and let it go, held and let go again until the rhythm felt like mine. Smoke filled every corner of the city, but fire leaves ashes that testify. They mistook my silence for weakness. Tomorrow they'll learn it's a blade. Neon bled a tired pink over the motel lot, a buzzing halo while the courthouse hunched downtown, a dark crown against steel gray sky. I stood outside my door with paper coffee and let the night settle until it felt like a uniform. An ice machine coughed. A siren wrote half a sentence and quit. The cut replayed the doorway, my jaw, the one line torn from a longer truth. Memory tried to fight tape and lost. An edit is a blade. Inside, I laid out documents like bandages left to right, clean to used action to follow. The room smelled of Freon and old carpet. Kellerman called voice like midnight on overtime. We're served. Fort Belvoir acknowledged. Home security custodian signed. Chain of custody notarized and time-stamped. If they swing, we've got the clock. I pictured stamps striking paper purple ink blooming like legal bruises. Copy, I said. He exhaled. We don't shout. We document. Try to sleep. Trying, I lied. The TV found me anyway. A late-night anchor introduced Victoria as if public service wore a navy blazer. She appeared in cool studio blue. I am protecting our family's honor, she said. Grief invites confusion. Facts matter. We had to step in. Margaret flashed 10 seconds Pearl's sorrow and vanished on cue. Courage, the anchor called it. The word didn't flinch. I did. I slid one subpoena behind the mirror, another under the pillow, a third into the inside pocket. I logged times and names calls, placed signatures, recorded. Ink reset my breathing. Outside, the neon shivered and held. Two pickups dozed under the hum. A rideshare idle driver blue lit. A man near the stairs smoked and nodded. The metal warmed under my palm through the jacket lining. I didn't take it out. Metal wants skin. Skin wants proof. I settled for heat. I tried the bed in 3 positions and failed. Springs talked. I practiced small drills from loud nights, 4 in hold, 2, 4 out. Unclench the fists the body makes by itself. Name 5 things in the dark lamp curtain seam, shoe-folded jacket, the red eye of the detector. If today belonged to spectacle, tomorrow belonged to paper. Evidence is patient. It moves by envelope and login faster than rumor when the right clerk cares. Somewhere a copy spun in a scanner. Somewhere a server took a breath and kept it. Old networks still carry word in straight lines, a call to an aide, a ping to a retired colonel, a text that says, "You should see this." I didn't know who would answer. I trusted the message to know the road. The cut returned anyway, bright as a burn behind closed eyes. I stepped out and let air rinse me of studio light. The lot smelled of warm tar and old rain. Moths battered the sign. Across the street, a diner killed its neon cup and flipped chairs. The last waitress locked up. I listened for a gavel and heard only rappers skittering the small law of trash. Inside, I turned the TV on without sound. Victoria on the steps mouthing words captions already knew. I killed the screen and watched the afterimage. Cold coffee spiraled down the sink like a thought refusing to finish. They want a spectacle. I'll give them silence. The neon buzz deepened as if it had always been there. I opened the door and leaned on the rail. A breeze pushed a grocery bag across the asphalt and let it go. The courthouse pulsed far off a ship without lights. A train shouldered through the city and kept its horn to itself. Then the night brightened in a long, clean sweep, washing across doors and parked cars, sliding up to my number and gliding on. I held my breath and measured intent, measured distance, measured what might arrive with morning. Right. Car headlights sweep the lot. Linda wonders if she's being watched. And if you've been holding your breath with me until now, don't let go, subscribe, so you won't miss what tomorrow in court will reveal. Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes it marches in uninvited. The courtroom on the 3rd morning felt swollen with whispers. People packed the benches' coats, brushing wood programs from earlier hearings stuffed into pockets. The marble floor seemed to hum with waiting. I sat at the defense table, uniform pressed, metal absent, silence wrapped tight around me like armor. The judge shuffled papers as though ready to close the door on me. I felt the gavel about to fall, the weight of verdict already tilting. Then the doors at the back opened. Not loudly, just a creak, a hinge complaining, but the sound carried like a drumbeat through the gallery. Heads turned as one. A tall figure filled the frame, silver hair cropped, close posture, still proud despite age. He wore not a suit, but full dress uniform, the kind that carried stories sewn into every ribbon. General Thomas Whitaker walked down the aisle without hesitation, boots striking marble with a rhythm that swallowed whispers. I had not seen him in years. The last time was smoke blood dust, him trapped under wreckage near Kunduz, me bleeding from a thigh wound and still dragging him clear. The gallery seemed to lean back as he passed, jurors shifting, reporters frozen mid-keystroke. Margaret's hand clutched pearls like a lifeline. Victoria's face remained still, but her eyes flicked sharp as glass. Whitaker didn't wait for permission. He reached the well-placed one hand on the rail and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, resonant, trained to carry across chaos, "I request to speak. I will not take long." The judge blinked, adjusted glasses, nodded once. "Proceed, General." He turned then, and his eyes found me. For a moment the courtroom was gone. I saw only the desert, the burned wreckage, his blood on my hands. He faced the jury. "Years ago our convoy was ambushed. I was pinned under twisted steel. Men were dying. Communications were dead. I told the soldier to leave me. She refused. He raised a hand toward me. She carried me out with a bullet in her leg and fire at her back. She did not perform. She acted. She saved my life." A ripple tore through the room. Reporters scrambled for pens, cameras clicked, but the silence between each shutter was louder than gunfire. He looked at the judge again. "If Linda Evans says she loved her father, she did. If she says she cared for him, she did. Because I know this woman. She does not trade in lies. She acts always." I sat motionless, throat-tight, hands clenched on the table. I did not cry, did not bow my head. My silence was the only language I had left. Then Whitaker did something no one expected. He straightened, heels together, chest out. Slowly, with precision only decades could teach, he raised his right hand to his brow. A salute. Not to the flag, not to the bench, but to me. Every breath in the courtroom stopped. The judge rose from his seat without a word, the gravity shifting the very air. Even the stenographer's fingers froze midair. Margaret's face drained of color. The cameras caught everything, but no flash could bleach the weight of that moment. I stared at Whitaker's spine, burning with something I hadn't felt in months, a recognition deeper than verdicts, louder than accusations. Across the aisle, Victoria shifted. For the first time, her hand trembled, knuckles whitening against the polished wood of the table. Her mask cracked, and I saw fear bleed through. Victoria's mask cracks, her knuckles white against the table. My father's silence had always felt like rejection. Now it returned as revelation. Late morning pressed on the room. The gallery had stopped whispering. Even impatience held its breath. I felt the grain of the table under my palms. A clerk stepped from a side door carrying a sealed folder with both hands as if it could bruise. A red ribbon circled the paperwork. General Whitaker stood at the rail, posture parade true. "Your Honor," he said with the court's leave. The judge nodded. Whitaker drew a flat packet from his breast pocket edges, worn from being guarded rather than read, and passed it to the clerk. "This is a Medal of Honor nomination filed 7 years ago for Staff Sergeant Linda Evans. The nominating officer was Colonel Henry Evans." My father's name uncoiled in the air. The room adjusted its footing. Margaret's pearls stilled. Victoria kept her gaze fixed, but a small muscle jumped along her jaw. The clerk broke the ribbon with the neat violence of duty. She checked the cover sheet, traced the reference, then looked up. Preliminary code corresponds to Fort Belvoir's archive index, she said. Verification requested this morning. Response pending. Packet appears complete. Whitaker did not look at me. Colonel Evans asked me to safeguard a copy, he told the bench. He feared the process might turn her into a spectacle before she had chosen whether to be seen. Read the summary, the judge said. Pages turned, dates, coordinates. The language of after-action reports written while the ground is still hot. Then the paragraph that makes a name into a witness nominee demonstrated conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. Under heavy fire with communications disabled, she evacuated multiple wounded personnel and refused evacuation herself until the last man was clear. Recommendation, Medal of Honor. The signature page slid free. The clerk hesitated just long enough for breath to catch. Signed, she said, blue ink, deliberate Henry A. Evans. Beneath, in handwriting that never expected to be read aloud here, a sentence added after the formal close. She earned it. 4 words knocked something loose inside my chest. I had carried the absence of them for years. Now the echo arrived from a room I thought was emptied out. The judge leaned forward, not in doubt but recalculation. Jurors stopped pretending they weren't watching. Margaret seemed to shrink within her posture. Victoria tried to pin the moment like an insect labeled contained, but it widened, refusing her frame. I thought of the kitchen slap the guest room whisper proud, that stray mercy rationed by a house that counted kindness like coins. Maybe silence had not been only punishment. Maybe it was his makeshift shelter for a truth he didn't trust the world to hold without breaking. The clerk touched an earpiece. Chambers has preliminary confirmation from Fort Belvoir, she reported. Reference verified, filing date matches, full records en route. The judge addressed the gallery. The court will treat the nomination as probative of character and service, subject to final archival verification. The sentence set a bridge between banks that had glared too long. Whitaker's eyes met mine, no theater, only the recognition soldiers trade when words would spill. Heat gathered behind my ribs, not grief, not triumph. Recognition plain and exact. Around us, the story reassembled in real time. Reporters frowned at their notes. The jury slid into a new arrangement of certainty. Margaret's hands lost choreography. Victoria sat very still, as if stillness could keep the ground from announcing its change. I lifted my fingers to the blank space where the ribbon had rested yesterday. Not longing inventory. The space did not feel empty now. It felt occupied by blue ink and a late mercy shaped like handwriting. Linda touches her chest where the medal once hung. Why didn't you tell me yourself, Dad? Sometimes the dead speak louder than the living. The judge's gavel rapped once, not to silence the gallery, but to steady his own hand. Noon light angled through the tall windows, falling across rows of faces strained with expectation. The clerk rolled in the projector cart, a blank screen descending like a curtain for a play no one wanted to admit they were about to watch. The hum of the machine filled the room like a heartbeat. I sat rigid at the defense table, nails pressed into my palm, bracing for words that could not be interrupted. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly there he was, my father, Colonel Henry Evans. His body thinner, his voice rasping oxygen tubes pressed against his cheeks. Yet his eyes carried that same iron that once had cut me to pieces across a kitchen table. The gallery inhaled as one, then went still. If anything happens to me, he began, steady, despite the weakness, I need this recorded. He shifted, cough catching in his chest, but his gaze fixed straight ahead. I have a daughter, Linda. She came home when I was too stubborn to ask. She carried me through months I would not have survived without her. His lips trembled. I failed her once already. When she chose her own path, I chose pride instead of support. That was my disgrace, not hers. Whispers rustled in the benches. Margaret clutched her pearls, knuckles whitening. Victoria leaned forward, eyes narrowing like she could intimidate the man even through the grave. The judge motioned for silence, but no one spoke anyway. Every sound belonged to the recording. Henry's voice cracked and he pressed a shaking hand to his chest. I won't fail her again. This house, this land, it belongs to Linda. She earned it not through bloodlines or signatures, but through presence. When I could not stand, she lifted me. When I could not breathe, she willed me to. When I chose silence, she answered with care. That is legacy. That is honor. My throat tightened. For years, silence from him had meant exile. Now his voice filled the chamber with everything I had starved to hear. The video image glitched slightly, then resumed. He drew a long breath. I know Evelyn will not accept this. I know Victoria will fight it. But they must live with truth. Linda deserves peace, even if only from me when I'm gone. His eyes softened, wet but unbroken. That is my last order. The screen froze on his face, half defiant, half pleading, before fading to black. No music, no cue, just the silence he left behind, louder than any applause. For a full 10 seconds, the courtroom refused to move. The jury sat, transfixed, hands hovering like they weren't sure if they belonged to them anymore. Reporters' pens hung in the air. Even the judge's lips parted, but no words came. Beside me, my breath slipped out slow. I hadn't realized I'd been holding it. His words wrapped around me like armor I had waited half my life for, but they burned too. Because why now? Why not when I needed them in the flesh? A sudden sound shattered the stillness, Margaret's sob. It wasn't staged this time, not the polished dab of a tissue. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders quaking, pearls rattling faintly with each tremor. Victoria, though Victoria didn't move. She sat statue still, jaw locked, mask frozen. Only her hands betrayed her, pressed flat against the table until her knuckles blanched bone white. The judge cleared his throat, voice almost reverent. This testimony is entered into record as a verified last declaration. He looked to the jury. You will weigh it with the rest of the evidence. But in truth, the verdict had already started forming in the room. I could feel it shift like weather before a storm, an unspoken acknowledgement that the dead had not only spoken, but spoken louder than any of the living, still trying to control his name. Margaret buries her face in her hands. Victoria sits frozen. Truth can be buried, but conscience keeps digging. Afternoon dimmed the courtroom into a tired hush. Windows lost their edge of light. Faces dulled to careful masks. Paper sounded heavier. I felt the morning in my shoulders. The clerk called the next witness. Heels clicked once on marble and stopped. Rachel Carter walked in like someone who had avoided her reflection and finally chose to look. A charcoal suit, hair pinned with resolve, a purse clutched as if it might flee. She raised her hand, swore, and sat. Fingers laced so tight the knuckles shone. The judge nodded. Proceed. Her voice came thin, then steadied. I was Colonel Evans's caregiver for the last 4 months of his life. Eyes flicked toward Margaret and Victoria, then back to the mic. He trusted me. He asked me to record messages when he felt strong enough. The in-room system saved locally and mirrored to a cloud backup. Kellerman kept it simple. What happened after the colonel passed? Ms. Victoria Evans approached me 2 days after the funeral, Rachel said. She said rumors could damage the name. She asked about recordings. A tremor, then resolve. I said yes. She said, quiet would be better for everyone. Did she ask you to do anything? Rachel unzipped her purse and placed a white envelope on the evidence tray. A check showed through, clean, uncreased, untouched. $25,000. She told me to delete the file and make sure no copies remained. I deleted the local file. She looked at Victoria. But I made a backup first. I couldn't live with what I was doing. A murmur rolled and died. Kellerman gestured. Please take the envelope and the storage device. A small USB drive joined the check. The judge glanced at opposing counsel. Objection Foundation chain of custody. Kellerman slid a stamped packet forward, responding to the subpoena issued yesterday affidavit from the security provider's custodian, device ID, extraction log, and this morning's forensic image. We can call the examiner. Call your expert, the judge said. A rumpled man took the stand with the calm of numbers. We cloned the drive and computed SHA-256 hashes. Values match the provider's mirror. No evidence of alteration. Timestamps align with the system clock and sync records. The jury leaned without moving. Kellerman returned to the point. Why didn't you cash the check? Rachel closed her eyes for a beat. I never cashed the check. It was blood money. The words struck wood and molding. She exhaled. I told myself I was protecting them. I knew I was burying him. What does the unedited file show? She looked at me. Apology lived there. It shows Ms. Evans arguing, then returning. It shows her apologizing. It shows him asking forgiveness. It shows hands held. It shows care. She faced the jury. It shows what families do when cameras aren't supposed to be part of it. The screen lit again. We watched the missing minutes return, the door closing softly, hard words dissolving into softer ones, my knees finding the floor, his fingers finding mine. The audio hissed, then caught my voice low, his lower silence between sentences no editor wants. Opposing counsel tried again. Your Honor, prejudicial, overruled, the judge said. When the clip ended, the room didn't startle. It settled like a patient whose breath finally matches the monitor. Victoria rose a half-inch and sat again, stranded between two losses. Margaret stared at the table, palms pressed flat. Kellerman finished with fact. Ms. Carter, did anyone coerce you to testify today? No. My conscience did. No further questions. Opposing counsel smiled without warmth, nitpicking times and terms, who handed what, why one copy and not another. Rachel didn't wobble. Because I knew I might need to forgive myself, she said. This is how I begin. The judge looked down the bench to the clerk, to the jury, rehearsing words that must be said later. Air thinned to the size of the moment. My hands had unclenched. Somewhere a pen slid to a halt and no one reached to claim it. Truly. Judge. This court will weigh the implications. Silence falls. Victoria slumps back in her chair. The gavel fell, but the true verdict came in silence. Evening had settled by the time the judge returned to the bench. The air in the courtroom was dense, as though the building itself had absorbed every whisper, every heartbeat, every denial. Lights glared off the polished wood, but shadows clung in corners like secrets refusing to die. I sat straight, hands folded, trying to steady the pulse that hammered against my throat. The judge's eyes moved across the room before he spoke. After careful consideration of testimony, evidence, and the deceased Colonel Henry Evans's recorded statement, this court rules that the property at 412 Kingston Drive rightfully belongs to Ms. Linda Evans. The Colonel's testament stands as final will and directive. His words landed without flourish, heavy, precise, final. The sound of the gavel cracked through the air, echoing like a rifle shot that marked the end of battle. I didn't move. I didn't let triumph touch my face. Across the aisle, Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. Her hand clutched the edge of the table, white-knuckled. Victoria sat carved from ice, her eyes fixed ahead, refusing to look at me, as though acknowledgement might shatter what remained of her armor. For a moment the room was frozen. Then it shifted. An older man in the gallery rose from his bench seat, his back curved with age but his gesture deliberate. He wore a faded cap embroidered with gold letters USMC. Without speaking, he pressed his right hand firmly over his heart. The silence that followed was thick, reverent, undeniable. Another man rose behind him, then another. One by one, veterans stood, their movements steady, shoulders squared, as if they had drilled for this moment without ever knowing it would come. No commands, no ceremony, just a silent acknowledgement that weighed more than any ruling ever could. The judge paused, his gavel resting near his hand. His eyes softened as he absorbed the sight, as if even his authority was humbled. General Whitaker, still in uniform, stood in the aisle. His presence carried gravity without needing sound. He turned toward me and, in a motion both sharp and solemn, raised his right hand to his brow. The salute was clean, precise, each muscle engaged with reverence. It wasn't just a gesture, it was validation. It was history, refusing to be erased. I rose slowly, my knees heavier than they should have been. Our eyes met across the room. I didn't return the salute, I couldn't. My throat locked too tight. But I stood in acknowledgement, spine straight, because standing was the only answer I had. The gallery grew stiller still. Then, almost unbelievably, the judge himself pushed back from his seat. He rose, robes settling, and lifted his hand in quiet respect. For a judge to salute was no ordinary act. It was a recognition beyond law, beyond verdicts, a recognition of service, of sacrifice, of truth. Around them, silence wrapped the room. Not the suffocating silence of disapproval, not the crushing silence of isolation. This silence felt different. It was heavy with dignity, buoyant with recognition. It pressed down and lifted at the same time, leaving no room for dispute. I didn't cry. But for the first time, silence let me breathe. Victory doesn't silence grief, it only shifts its weight. Morning, after the courthouse steps were colder than the night before. November light thinned across the stone, exposing faces, flags, microphones. Reporters clustered like gulls. They found Victoria first. She stood at the center, blazer, immaculate hair defying wind. Questions hit her. Were you surprised by the ruling? Did you stage the video? And she adjusted her face into bruised authority. I protected our legacy, she said. Grief can confuse facts. I made difficult choices to keep us from being devoured by rumor. If that was misunderstood, I accept that. Cameras devoured it. Margaret waited behind her pearls in place, lipstick precise, posture practiced. When I stepped into her sightline, the mask flickered 1 second of fatigue, the look of morphine running dry. Then she lowered her gaze. Not shame, not surrender, only refusal. She passed me without a word, perfume and cold air marking the gap. Reporters called my name. I kept walking. Their questions snapped, vindicated, reconcile. What about the house? But I let them scatter. Silence had once punished me. Now it held me upright. By noon, the steps were empty except for litter and echoes. I drove back alone. The estate loomed the way memory does, too large, too familiar, altered. The key turned with a resistance that felt personal. Inside, my steps belonged to a stranger. The hallway breathed dust. Rooms remembered us badly. In the dining room, chairs faced my father's absent place. Margaret's silver winked. My reflection in a spoon startled me. The parlor held a floral arrangement gone brittle. A petal collapsed at my touch. I walked the old circuit kitchen stairs, study bedroom. Relief didn't come quiet, did thick and uneven. I opened windows. The house exhaled a tired breath. On my phone, Victoria's interviews looped, misunderstood. Difficult choices, protecting legacy. Without the court, the words had no echo. Margaret's obsession with appearances felt hollow now, lavender on mildew. The costumes remained. The audience gone. At the stairs, I paused. Houses keep receipts, scuffs, dents, scratches. I traced them like entries in a ledger. Somewhere, a pipe ticked. Somewhere, a floorboard confessed. In the study, my father's chair waited, softened by absence. I placed another beside it, making the pairing strange. Draft lifted a page in his manual. I pressed it flat. The elm outside tossed its last leaves in futile argument with winter. Home used to feel like a dare. Victory didn't mend distance. It revealed it. The kitchen still held the echo of an old slap and, of the softer word afterward, proud. Both belonged to me, now wound and suture. The hallway mirror returned a version of me that almost looked steady. The verdict had given me Wall's land history inked in blue, but not a family. The weight had shifted off my chest onto my hands. Work-weighted repairs, bread for no one, coffee for whoever might arrive. In the foyer, I spoke aloud. They lost the house, but I lost the family long ago. The words didn't echo. They settled. Upstairs, the bedroom drawer stuck on the left as always. I coaxed it open. Drawer creaks open. Metal rests inside beside Henry's photo. I thought healing would come in a verdict. Instead, it came in silence among strangers. December light spilled through stained glass at Fairhaven Memorial Hall, fractured into soft blues and reds across the wooden floor. The air carried the hushed reverence of spaces designed for memory, not spectacle. Rows of folding chairs filled slowly, coats, draped shoes, scuffed programs, folded and unfolded by hands unsure what to do while waiting. I sat 3 rows back, metal tucked in my pocket presents, unnoticed. It was enough. The ceremony began without flourish. A local choir hummed a hymn barely above a whisper. Veterans of every branch lined the stage. Uniforms varied, some crisp, some softened by years. The master of ceremonies spoke of quiet heroes, those who had endured without headline or medal, those who had returned and built lives without applause. Each name read was met with silence, not the silence of avoidance, but of weight, respect, recognition. I kept my head down, fingers brushing the edges of my program. My name was nowhere on it. That was how I wanted it. I hadn't come for recognition. I had come because silence here belonged to all of us, a silence different from courtrooms or kitchens. It was not punishment. It was belonging. Then it happened. My name. Clear, deliberate, carried across the hall with no room for mistake. Staff Sergeant Linda Evans. The stillness thickened. A rustle, then a wave, people rising row by row, not clapping, not shouting. Rising into silence, offering it to me like a banner raised without sound. I froze, breath caught the metal burning against my palm inside my pocket. I stood slowly. Faces blurred, veterans, neighbors, strangers who knew only what they had been told today. Yet their silence wrapped me like a uniform never could. I touched the metal through cloth, gripped it until my fingers ached. "You never said you believed me, Dad," I whispered to myself low enough to drown under the hush. "But you believed in me. That was enough." The hymn resumed, voices low, fragile as frost. I sat again, hands steadier, chest lighter. The program slid closed on my lap, but the silence lingered. Not as cage, not as verdict this time, as peace. When the ceremony ended, the hall emptied into winter. I stepped outside. The air was sharp sky, pale with early dusk. Snow had not yet come, but its promise lived in the wind. I walked down the stone steps, metal still warm in my pocket, scar, no longer a wound, but a trace of where I had been. I walked into winter sunlight, scar fading into legacy. I carried silence like a burden, and only later did I learn it could be my strength. If you've walked with me through this journey, I ask you, share your thoughts below. Tell me what you would have done in my place, or what silence has meant in your own life. Your voices remind me that no one carries their scars alone. My advice: don't let others define your worth. Speak when you must, but know that silence chosen on your terms can be just as powerful. Support me with your words. I'll be reading every one of them.